Sup guys, Bjorn here, I hope you're all doing great. This week I originally planned to release a gearing guide and maybe some class guides, but I ran into some editing burnout and I decided to just make a fun video about something that I really enjoy, and yeah, maybe that will be a lot more enjoyable. So in this video we'll talk about the new single target sims that have been released for almost all of the specs now for the new 9.2 raid. We're gonna compare them to my 9.2 raid tier list that I made a week back or so, and yeah, we're gonna revise it basically, take a look at everything I did wrong in there, because, spoiler alert, I had a lot of faulty assumptions obviously, because it was only my predictions. Anyway, we're gonna correct it as much as possible, we're gonna talk about all the different specs, we're also gonna touch a little bit on what I'm maining in the new patch, because I know some of you guys have been wondering about that, and I have also been very conflicted myself about what to main in 9.2. It's been a very hard decision actually, and something that I might end up regretting, but we'll see. Anyway, I hope you will enjoy the video. If you do enjoy it, please subscribe down below, that would help me out a ton, and to you guys who already are subscribed, thanks a lot. Sup guys, Bjorn here. I'm from the future, I'm wearing my future hat, and I wanted to tell you that this is gonna be a very long and rambly video, unedited, and a lot more terrible than I anticipated, frankly. But hey, the whole point was for me to record something that I didn't have to edit, so fuck it, I'll just upload it as it is, with a few short edits, and yeah. I hope you guys enjoy it anyway. If you want to see more of this commentary style or whatever, or just more rambly videos, make sure to let me know in the comments. Otherwise, have a good day. So I have the sims here above me, and we're gonna go through them bottom to top, so from the worst spec to the best. Now there are a few things to note. As I said before, not all classes are in here. We're missing Rogue, we're missing Havoc DH, we're missing Balance Druid, but I figured it was still good enough to make the video anyway. Also remember that these are sims, so take that with a grain of salt. This is obviously full uptime, it's a set duration, patchwork fight, etc, etc. You also have all external buffs. These sims are made with full tier 28 BIS gear, so every single spec has their BIS setup equipped here with all the bird power, all the 278 conduits, etc. So these are going to be very high numbers obviously compared to what you'll see probably for yourself. So without further ado, let's take a look at the actual sims then, and we'll start from the bottom of the barrel here. We have Affliction Warlock playing Night Fae as the very worst available sim here, and that doesn't surprise me a whole lot. I did have them in the bottom of B tier. What does surprise me a little bit is that Necrolord is actually gaining like 700 DPS here, 650 DPS or so. That is pretty interesting. I did predict them to have a bit of an execute niche here with single target with Necrolord, but I didn't think it was gonna be that big of a difference. I still don't really think that this warrants putting them in the C tier, maybe at the very bottom of C tier you could argue, but hey, you're probably still going to be playing Night Fae for the majority of the patch. You also are obviously going to lose Soul Shape whenever you swap out of Night Fae, so yeah. I'm not too sold on Affliction either way here, but it is nice to see that they're at least competitive with some of these other bottom of the barrel specs here on single target, and they beat out a few of them at least playing Necrolord, so not too bad overall for Affliction, I would say. Monk Windwalker then. Well, I did have them in the C tier here at the very top, but I did expect them to be pretty bad at single target obviously. They weren't being in C tier in my opinion just because of their good AoE profile, etc, etc, their burst damage, but here, yeah, I think I'll just keep them in the C tier at the top here, I think, because even though their single target is still bad, that was expected, they're still going to bring a lot of value to the AoE fights, and one of Windwalker is probably not going to be terrible in 9.2, although it's not something that I would necessarily recommend. Next up we have something pretty disappointing, Unholy DK. Here I did predict them to be pretty bad, so I'm not surprised in that manner, but I was actually thinking that the buffs would maybe help them a little bit more. Now I'm not actually sure if this sim is without or with the buffs. If this is without the buffs, then it's pretty promising for DK, because then they would gain maybe another 10-11% on top of that. That would put them at maybe 15,500 DPS or so, and that would actually be fairly competitive in 9.2. However, if this is with buffs, then Unholy is doing like as bad damage as Affliction Warlock, right? It's terrible. Now, you do still have the Mass Grip, you have some DK utility, you're pretty tanky, so maybe they're still a little bit more valuable than the Affliction Warlock, and I probably would have them in C tier still, but at the very bottom. But if it's without the buffs, then they're gonna gain a bunch of DPS, right? And then you might start pushing them up into the B tier here. Next up we have the Hunter, and here we have Marksmanship and Beast Mastery clumped together. Very close to my tier list here, except that they're swapped, right? Beast Mastery doing a little bit more damage here. Again, this is actually a Marksmanship Hunter sim that I think runs the bugged version of the tier set. Now I'm not 100% on that, so if any hunters knows, please let me know in the comments. But I think this Hunter APL runs the bugged version of the tier set, which means that Marksmanship would gain a bit of extra DPS whenever they fix the tier set. So in that case, I think Marksmanship is still gonna pull ahead a bit of Beastmaster in 9.2. They also have a bit of a better burst profile and maybe a bit better AoE. So definitely keep an eye out for Marksmanship buffs, or Marksmanship bug fixes that could push them maybe up a little bit here. Next up we have Frost DK two-handed, and I guess this is just simming straight up worse than the one-handed build, so no reason to dwell on this. Same goes for Shadow Priest with Kyrian. For some reason the Elemental, Shaman and the Shadow Priest here has all of their 4 covenants listed, so I'll just ignore the lower parts of the Shadow Priest and the Elemental Shaman sims. We already talked about Affliction Necrolord, so let's scroll up a little bit here, and yeah, I scrolled up a lot, but whatever. Next up we have DK with Ice Cap, so I'm guessing this is a talent build and one-handed DK. I don't know anything about this, I'm not going to comment on it, but as you can see, it's clearly worse than the Breath of Sindragosa build. It's clearly worse than the just standard Frost single target one-handed build, so you're probably never going to play Ice Cap with this DPS, so we'll not dwell on that either. Next up is Arms Warrior, and here I made a pretty terrible mistake. Arms is only doing about 14.5k in this sim, and I had them in the S tier. Now I still think they're going to be really, really strong early on in the patch, so this is probably a bit of more of a scaling issue than anything, right? With full board power, they're not quite as strong in terms of DPS. I still think they're going to be close to S tier, maybe A tier at the start of the patch, and then they're going to start falling. So at the end of the patch, which is after all what this tier list mostly was for, right? Although I did give some specs some leeway because they were really strong at the start. Arms overall is not really an S tier spec in 9.2 when you consider all of this board power, and I would probably have them maybe at the very top of B tier, with the asterisks that they're gonna be very strong on raid release, they're gonna be very strong during the first weeks, and then they're slowly gonna fall off compared to Fury, as we'll see soon over the course of the patch. Similar here we have Shadow Priest Nightfade, not gonna talk about that. Druid, Feral Druid, this is pretty rough. I thought that Feral Druid would be simming a lot higher on single target. Here we have Owlweave, by the way. I should probably talk about the Owlweave stuff because it is doing 300 or so DPS more. Regardless here, there's not a huge difference, and the single target DPS is the only strength that the Feral Druid has in raid, so considering that it's doing very mediocre single target damage, right? It's not doing more single target damage than pretty much any of these specs here in B tier. That means that it should not be in B tier, definitely, and I still think that it's a lot less valuable than pretty much every single one of these specs as well, even though it's doing slightly more single target than some of the specs down here. Which means that ultimately I think the Feral Druid sadly goes in the D tier in the 9.2 raid revised tier list, because it doesn't bring anything to the raid, the DPS is bad, and why the DPS is bad is just simply because the tier set is really bad. They don't have a good board power either. God damn it, fucking hell, I was supposed to do this in one take, but I just can't seem to say something really stupid, and then I just have to fucking correct myself. Well, whatever, we'll keep going here. The Feral Druid, what I was gonna say about it was that it has a very bad tier set on single target, and the second Lego is also very bad, right? Because you're already running the Nightfade Lego. That tells you that the Feral Druid doesn't really have a very strong legendary on single target, so the other Lego is probably not going to be more than like 5% or even less than that maybe, and compared to most other specs that's gaining a lot with their tier set, a lot with their double Lego, Feral Druid is falling. But now I keep pausing for like 10 seconds. God damn it, this is a disaster of a video. I'm sorry about this, guys. If you want to see more of this discussion, rambly ass videos from me, please leave it down in the comments. It would really help me out with some feedback. If you think I'm just taking way too much of your time right now, leave that as well. That would really help me out to know for the future. So yeah, we'll move on to Retribution Paladin here, and I had them in the C tier. I did probably underestimate their single target a little bit. It doesn't seem like their bad tier set did affect their single target as much as I thought it would. So all things considered, doing 15.2k DPS here pretty decent and a little bit better than I expected, and I think we could probably put them in the lower end of B tier because of that. Next up we have Venthyr Shadow Priest. Not gonna talk about that because it's not the best shadow build. Fire Mage and Arcane Mage, I'll just get these two in one go here because they're so close to each other, and they're actually very close to each other on my list as well. So hey, I'll take that as another dub for me. Pretty accurate there, I would say. And the Fire Mage, I think, is going to be a little bit better than the Arcane Mage still, even with this slight DPS difference here, because Arcane Mage, as you see, it has a lot of variance here on the DPS graph, and also it's probably a lot more difficult to play than Fire, I would say, and you're also maybe not having quite as strong of a profile in a raid progression setting. So personally I think Fire is going to be actually quite a lot better than Arcane, maybe especially during the first weeks, but hey, who knows. Next up we have Frost Death Knight, and again I paused for like 5 seconds before this, I don't know why, but hey, let's go. Breath is simming slightly behind the normal build, so I guess you could play either here, but look at that variance for the Breath build. I'm not sure if this is due to some weird RNG synergy or if Breath is just really finicky to keep up or something like that, but hey, DK mains, tell me in the comments down below. Either way, the Frost DK standard build seems to be seeming a little bit higher, doing 15.5k DPS. So this is about where Unholy would end up if Unholy gets, or if this is without the Unholy buff. So I don't actually know that yet, don't quote me on that, but whatever. The Frost DK doing 15.5k DPS is really, really strong. It's actually a lot better than C tier, considering they have the mass grip still from Necrolord if they're playing that, and they also have the usual death grip. They're pretty decently tanky. I would probably say that the DK, or the Frost DK rather, should be pushed up to the B tier here as well. And let's enjoy another 10-second pause by me because my brain is literally fried for some reason, but hey, let's go. Shadow Priest doing the this is Necrolord Shadow, obviously, because it's the best single target build, and it's doing 15.6k DPS. So a lot of people said that Shadow Priest would be pretty gutted with the nerfs, and they were pretty gutted. They were seeming a lot higher than this before, but hey, 15.5k still not terrible. However, you've got to consider that Shadow Priest is meant as a single target specialized spec, right? That is their strength, and they don't really have a great profile, they don't have good AoE or anything like that. So when Shadow's doing this low single target, similar to like Unholy isn't really great or Feral is in D tier, Shadow Priest suffers from a bit of a similar situation here, but it's still doing more than Fire, it's still doing more than Arcane. I still think we can confidently keep it in the B tier, all things considered. Next up we have Survival Hunter. This is really interesting. It's simming almost 2k ahead of Beastmastery and Marksmanship. Very, very significant DPS difference there. I mean, now that I see these DPS differences, I would almost maybe like push these down even further. Maybe we need another tier here or something, because like 2k DPS is not a small difference at all. However, the Survival Hunter tier set is very RNG, and you can see that in the high variance here that Survival Hunter DPS has. 16k is still, it's not bad actually. I've got to say I'm pretty impressed, and it is probably about where I thought it would end up as well. I did put it very low in the B tier because I figured they don't have any utility, they're going to be very squishy, but I did say that I think they have enough single target to rival some of these specs up in A and S. So I'm a little bit tempted to just keep it where it is, honestly. I don't think it needs too much. Maybe it... Fuck, this is difficult. I mean, it's doing 700k more, or 700 DPS more than the Ret Paladin, but it's probably a lot worse than Ret Paladin. Doesn't bring a raid buff, a lot more squishy, a lot worse profile, so yeah, fuck it, I'll keep it below the Ret Paladin. Next up, Destruction Warlock, and this is very, very pog. This is probably one of the biggest faults in my tier list, and also one of the biggest gains for Warlocks and just overall poggies by this sim here, because Destruction wasn't really simmed with the right, or wasn't played rather with the right build when we did the testing on the PTR. Destruction has a new build with like Reign of Chaos in single target. You're playing Madness, you're playing Reverse Entropy with the Eradication talent as well. You're playing Soul Conduit even, so you're really switching up your build a lot here with Destro, but it does result in a very, very strong single target actually. it does have a high variance, similar to Survival here, because you're playing Reign of Chaos, you're playing those pretty RNG-based talents, right? So not surprised at all, but I am surprised by the DPS a lot. And this is way, way better than I thought Destruction was capable of in 9.2. 16.3k single target is like definitely enough to warrant a probably A tier spot for Destro, or maybe the very low end of B tier, or high end of B tier, sorry. I think this is actually very, very promising. This is with a massive caveat though, that it's going to be dog shit during the first weeks of the patch, right? This is very, very tier set reliant. You do need your double Lego, you do need your tier set. So on second thought, maybe we should actually move it up to the, or move it down, sorry, to the top of B tier, because it is just going to be that terrible during the first weeks. It's probably the antithesis of the Arms Warrior, where it's gonna be pretty terrible during the first weeks. Arms Warrior is gonna be very good during the first weeks, but then Arms Warrior is gonna fall off when you gain more board power, and the Destruction Warrior is gonna rise a lot with the board power stonks. Alright, let's scroll up on our time here. Let's get into the crazy things. And here there's a lot of blue at the top. That's because of a few different reasons that we'll get into soon. And I won't touch on these Venthyr, Necrolord and Kyrian elemental sims, because again, it's not the best covenant for elemental shaman, so it isn't really worth discussing for me here. Warlock Demonology, however, is doing 16.9k DPS, and this is really, really, really strong. And this is with the Nightfade build here. So Nightfade Demo 16.9k, that's better DPS than I would have expected, honestly. I thought that they were gonna be a bit lower, maybe in the 16k range, somewhere around there. So very similar to maybe Survival, Shadow Priest, but they actually did seem a lot higher than I expected, and that definitely pushes them up into the A tier here, doing 17k single target, as well as being the best Warlock spec, being incredibly tanky. I mean, you could even maybe say that they should be in the S tier, but I don't know, I'm a little bit too DPS focused for that. And you've also got to consider here that we haven't seen the Balanced Druid sims, we haven't seen the Rogue sims for any of the specs. So even though this looks like very close to the top here for Demo, it's probably going to be pushed down a bit, because I know that Balance is going to do more damage than this for sure, and probably all of the Rogue specs, or maybe at least, or not all of the Rogue specs, I'm trolling, but Sub and Assassination, I think at least, are going to be doing more damage than Demo on single target. So they are probably going to be pushed down a few spots here, but still a lot better for Demo than I thought, and I think they should probably be somewhere around here, actually. Next up, we have a really interesting Demonology build. This is Necrolord Demonology, but it's not just running the same talent setup here. That's not why it's simming 100 DPS higher. It's actually a completely different build of Demonology, and it's really, really cool, I think, that in 9.2 these two different builds are gonna sim very, very close to each other. So let's take a look at the actual build here. We have Sacked Souls, Soul Conduit, Power Siphon with From the Shadows and Dreadlash. And this is running Bale Spiders, so this is a full Demo Bolt build, and this is obviously why you're Necrolord, right? You have a very, very strong Decimating Bolt synergy with this build here, with all of the additive Demo Bolt power buffs stacking on top of each other, so pretty nice. And this is a build that's been strong in PvP for quite a while, but I personally did never think it was gonna overtake the Demonic Consumption build in PvE. I figured that Demonic Consumption was just too broken, but I guess Blizzard proved us wrong once more, and this build is actually playable in 9.2, so good news. Is it going to be fun? Maybe. If you're enjoying Shadow Bolt and Demo Bolt a lot, it's going to be probably a lot less min-maxy, a lot less like finicky with the setups. You don't have to worry about your Tyrant anymore, right? Your Tyrant is probably doing 0 damage here. However, I still think it's pretty unlikely that this very small DPS increase will see a lot of Warlocks swapping to Necrolord to play Demo, right? Because remember, Nightfade has that amazing soul shape, and I think there's quite a few fights in the upcoming raid that does actually require some form of movement. Skipping over the elemental specs, or the elemental sims rather, of the Weird Covenants will arrive at Frostmage, and this surprised me a lot. I did not think that Frostmage was going to be this high in single target DPS. It's outperforming the other specs by like 2k DPS here. Sure, the profile is worse, but I still think that 2k DPS should probably push them. Should it push them into S tier? I mean, they're doing the same damage as Fury. They're a range spec. Fuck it. I'm gonna do it. I might get shit for this because the Frostmage profile is not that great, right? And all things considered. But then again, you're tanky mage spec, you're ranged, you have slow on the mobs, you're unkillable, you have mobility, you have arcane intellect. Fuck it, Frostmage is S tier. I've decided in 9.2. Moving on to Fury. Fury still fits in the S tier, I think, doing a ton of single target damage here. The start difference is Arms contra Fury, right? We have almost a 3k DPS difference here, and I did acknowledge in the tier list to begin with that Fury was going to outscale Arms. I was fully aware of it, but I did not think it was going to be by 3000 DPS. I mean, this is a massive difference. Now, obviously, I'm not sure if there's any problems with the APL of any of these specs. There might still be APL issues with all of these sims, actually. I have no idea. I'm just going to trust the simcraft website. But, hey, 3k DPS between Fury and Arms is a massive difference, and that means that you're definitely playing Fury pretty much all the time once you have your bird power, once you have the things that actually sets you apart from the Arms DPS, obviously. And the very two specs at the top of the list here, we have Elemental Shaman, very surprisingly, and then Enhancement Shaman. Enhancement Shaman, I'm not going to say it surprised me, because there were a lot of whispers going around that Enhancement Shaman was absolutely destroying the DPS meters. I just wasn't quite aware of it by the time I made my raid tier list, and I also was maybe a little bit just... yeah, I didn't expect them to do as much single target as they do, right? I thought they would maybe do 16, 17k, maybe 17k single target, and then they would add the extra Wind Fury value on top of that. But it turns out they're doing 18k single target and the extra Wind Fury value on top of that. So yeah, definitely an S tier spot. This could even be like nerfed, to be honest, but I would be a little bit surprised if Blizzard nerfed Enhancement, since it's been pretty bad for a very long time. Or at least, I mean, it's not been bad, it's actually been good for like the past patches, but it's not been like very high regarded in the community. It's been bad in Mythic Plus, and the perception overall hasn't been great. So Blizzard usually doesn't like nerf those specs incredibly hard, but hey, we'll see. Elemental, that I didn't touch on, is for a very specific reason, and this is nothing I knew about until I watched the Titanforge podcast, obviously great podcast by Dratnos and company, and those guys were saying that the Elemental Shaman tier set is currently bugged, so that since you just get an infinite storm melee, you can actually refresh your stacks of the haste buff that storm melee gives you whenever you pop out your next storm melee. So you're basically like gaining the haste stacks from your first storm melee, and then you're just refreshing at max haste stacks every time you pop another storm melee, making you incredibly haste stacked. And you can see here at the, if we take a look at the Elemental DPS curve, that it's incredibly consistent. And Elemental was already very consistent in terms of DPS. They didn't have any big spikes, they didn't have any burst, they just had a very consistent profile. But here you can see that it's like you barely drop, because sure, you're storm meleeing, and you're obviously doing a few other things like Fate Transfusion every 2 minutes or every 1.5 minutes rather, but still, outside of Fate Transfusion and that extra burst, you are just sitting at like 15, 16, 17k single target consistently. You are just spamming Lightning Bolt. If we take a look here at the actual time spent casting, you're obviously doing a lot of lava burst because the tier set gives you a lot of lava burst casts, but other than that, you're doing a lot of lightning bolts to keep up that storm melee, obviously, and you have nothing else to press, basically, because you're running a fairly weird talent build for single target, all things considered here. And then you have obviously a lot of time spent Earthshock as well. So very strange Elishama build, I've got to say, for a couple of different reasons. You're running like Aftershock, Earth and Rage, Storm Primal Elementalist, unlimited power on single target. This is like a very weird build for anyone that's played Elemental on single target in the last couple of expansions. But hey, the tier set is just that big of a synergy, I guess. And also, I want to point out here that I'm not sure if this is a bug or if this is intended, right? Should you be able to refresh these Storm stacks or not? If you shouldn't, then Blizzard might fix it, and Elishama is going to drop like to somewhere maybe in here. In terms of single target, around 15, 16k, or even lower. I'm not actually sure how big of a buff this thing was for Elishama, but in the Titanforge podcast, they were saying about, oh boy, I'm really losing it now. Dratnos and the boys were saying that it was anywhere from like 33 to 67. They were just throwing out numbers, to be fair, but hey, if it's as much as a 33% or a 67% damage increase, then obviously Elemental is gonna lose a fuck ton of value whenever Blizzard fixes it. So what have I not touched on here? Well, if Frost Mage is in A tier, is S tier, why is not Demo in S tier? This is starting to get really convoluted here. Maybe Demo should also be in S tier. And then we have the rogue specs. I didn't touch on the rogue specs, but yeah, upon second thought, I still think the sub and assassination predictions holds fairly watertight. Yeah, I really can't speak English anymore, as you can clearly see. That's just because I, for some reason, had to do this video in one take. My sub and assassination rankings were fairly accurate, I would say, but my outlaw ranking was too high, I've got to admit. The tier set is not going to be that strong on single target, the board power is not going to be that strong on single target, and outlaw baseline single target is also not as strong as sub or SS. So I have no idea why I thought that outlaw would be doing like as much damage as these two specs. This is tough, boys. I don't actually know. This is just going to be a wild guess since we don't have the Sims, but I would probably put it somewhere here. And then obviously Elemental goes up to S tier if this is intended, if the actual if it works like this. But if this is a bug, then yeah, Elemental is probably going to be somewhere around maybe here or here. Okay, looking at this now, B tier is maybe just a little bit too stacked. Could we consider moving stuff up? I mean, yeah, Destroy should probably be moved up, and should Arms be moved up? Probably not, right? It's doing very, very low amounts of damage. It's too hard to rank and try to take into consideration like start of patch and end of patch, because some specs are just very, very strong at the start of the patch, and some specs are very, very strong at the end of the patch. And if this is going to be end of patch predictions, then yeah, some of these specs are wildly misplaced, right? Because some are just not scaling well at all, like Arms Warrior. But yeah, whatever. I'll just leave the tier list like this because fuck it. Havoc DH I didn't say a single word about. I still think they're going to be pretty strong. I don't actually know where they would land here in terms of DPS. Probably, I don't know, I would say probably somewhere around here, maybe 15.5k, maybe a little bit more, somewhere around the Shadow Priest mark, I would say. And then obviously Balanced Druid I also forgot to talk about. The Balanced Druid Sims that I've been seeing, actually, fuck it, Bloodmallet does have some, and obviously you shouldn't really trust these because I'm not sure what they have done with the profile here of the sim. If you take a look at the sim, it's running like 283 gear in pretty much every single slot. Yeah, so this is just using scaled gear up to 283, which is not very accurate at all for a sim in full tier 28, obviously. But if we then move over to races here, now I think that they're actually running like 278 gear, they're running a 285 weapon, yeah, they're running real gear here with like Mythic Plus, trinkets, etc. So this is more, I would say this is a little bit more trustworthy, the race sim here, but still, I mean, it's running like 285 bracers and belt, I don't know, this is kind of weird, this is spooking me out a bit, but even so, you can still see that the DPS is like in 7,500s. If we go back to the soul binds, it was in the 16,900, so yeah, about 17k. The difference here between the soul bind and the race sim is just because of different profiles, and out of these I would actually trust the race sim a little bit more, I think, and that would put us at about 17,400, which is the single best spec here if we ignore the shamans. So that would definitely warrant an S tier spot. Probably the best spec behind enhancement if enhancement continues to be this incredibly strong single target. Yeah, that is my revised tier list. Looking pretty good here as I skim through it now. Yeah, Aftlook. Yeah, these things are pretty accurate. Elle Shaman, yeah, Elle Shaman is a massive asterisk. Definitely possible to put it in the S tier if the bugs continue. Maybe even in the C tier if they get hit too hard by the bug fixes. I don't know. Even if they get nerfed, however, Elemental is usually a good progression spec. They're tanky, they have a good profile, they're consistent, etc. So I wouldn't worry too much if I was an Elemental Shaman here. Moving up, we have Survival. Yeah, Survival and Ret, obviously. Survival is doing less damage than, or sorry, it's doing a lot more damage than Ret here. It's doing like 700 DPS more, but it's less tanky, it's less utility, worse profile, and you've also got to keep in mind it's a high variance here with the Survival Hunter set. So all things considered, I still think Survival is a bit worse than Ret in 9.2. It's also going to be maybe a lot more tier set dependent and board power dependent. Frost DK doing 15.5, yeah, so a bit better DPS than Ret Paladin, and they also have the grip for utility, so a bit better overall than the Ret Paladin for sure. Might even push them up over these specs here, maybe over the Shadow Priest actually. The Shadow Priest doing about the same DPS as the Frost DK, a bit less utility, but it is a range spec, it's pretty strong, it's also tanky, it's a good execute, usually a pretty damn decent spec in raid. The Mage specs, I think I rated them fairly accurately. They're doing a bit less damage than Frost and Shadow Priest, but they're also Mage specs, so I definitely think they should be a bit higher here. We have Outlaw, and this is not on here obviously, but I would honestly maybe push it down a bit further. Yeah, fuck it. We'll push it down to here. I think it's gonna do comparable DPS to maybe Ret Paladin. Is it even gonna do that much? Yeah, it's fuck it. I think... Okay, this is obviously entirely speculation. As you can see, I don't really know anything about Outlaw Rogue. I still think they're gonna do about as much DPS as Ret Paladin. Fuck it. Next up, Arms Warrior. Yeah, it's not doing a lot of damage, but it gains a bit of extra value here in the B tier because it's very, very strong in the first few weeks. Very tanky, gains Rallying Cry to the raid obviously as well, and you're gonna want to bring a lot of warriors because Fury is gonna be so strong later in the patch, and some of those Fury warriors might play Arms on some of the first fights, so I still don't think Arms is that terrible, but yeah, definitely not S tier. I don't know what I was thinking there. Destro Warlock, yeah, as I said, very surprised by the Destro Warlock DPS gains here from the new build and from the tier set. Looking very, very strong and pretty fun as well to play, I would say. So yeah, massive destruction stonks rising, warranted of a low A tier spot, I think. Even though massive asterisks here, these guys are going to be absolutely dog shit before you actually get your 4 set, right? Before your 4 set, you're D tier spec. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt. Havoc Gauge, again, not on here, similar to the Rogue, but I still think they're going to do more damage than Outlaw. They're definitely going to do more damage than Arms. Where is the highest spec here? We have like, I have it higher than Destro, and Destro is at 16.3. No, that's wrong. Yeah, Havoc is not going to be better than Destro, I don't think. It's probably going to do somewhere in the 15k of single target, maybe a bit higher, if they're lucky. Maybe warrants a low A tier spot, all things considered. Especially since you need the raid buff as well. Assassination and Sub, again, not on here. I think they're gonna do in the range of like 16-17k single target, maybe more, maybe like up here in the 17 point something range. That would put them in the same tier in terms of DPS as most of these specs here, but I don't think they're as stackable as any of these specs here, right? And they're maybe a bit worse in terms of profile as well. You could potentially see that maybe Sub-Rogue would be pushed up here. If Sub-Rogue is doing substantially more damage than Assassination, then yeah, maybe it should actually be S tier. At the very end here, I also promised that I would talk about my mains going into 9.2 and that situation. Well, I initially figured I would play Survival Hunter. I was actually pretty hyped for it. The tier set looked pretty decent, but there were a lot of question marks, and I was very wary of the question marks. Now, what did contribute a lot to me wanting to main the Survival Hunter in 9.2 was the fact that I didn't think that Warlock or Demonology, for that matter, would be very strong, right? I figured that the Affliction and Destro DPS would be really poor, and then that the Demo DPS would be pretty decent, middle of the pack single target DPS, but since Demo has a pretty wonky profile, even though like it's similar to Shadow Priest, right? If you're doing mediocre single target DPS as Demo, you're not really that useful. So I was a little bit worried, but as you can see here, Demo is doing like 1k above Shadow Priest. They're actually doing quite a lot of single target damage in 9.2, which means that there isn't really a huge reason for me to actually swap to Survival, right? Survival is a worse spec, it's melee, it has less survivability, it's doing less damage, it has a worse profile, it's less tanky, less utility for the raid as well, you're not bringing any gateways, health stones, etc. we also only currently have one warlock in the guild besides me, so there were a lot of reasons for me to not swap to survival, and with these sims out, with demonology simming higher than survival, even with full bis, etc., there's just no real point for me to main survival in Mythic raiding in 9.2, sadly. However, I will still play obviously a lot of survival in keys. It will definitely be my second most played character in 9.2, and I will aim to get the tier set as soon as possible, but it's going to be a bit hard for me to acquire the tier set if I'm not raiding on it. I could consider raiding in a second guild on the survival hunter. That would be something I would possibly be open to. So if any of you guys have any suggestions, I would probably prefer a very low-end Mythic guild at that point, because I'm not that great at Survival Hunter. I'm not actually that well geared currently as well. I'm like 245, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to get much higher. So anyway, I'm maining the Demo Lock in 9.2. I'm gonna raid on it. There's still gonna be a ton of Survival Hunter content going out. I'm probably still mainly gonna do Survival Hunter content because I find the spec more fun. Most of my viewers are probably Survival Hunter viewers at this point, and the spec is also maybe a little bit better suited towards Mythic Plus than Demonology. So even if I wanted to be competitive in Mythic Plus and I want to push some higher keys in 9.2, I probably would even be better off playing Survival than Demo actually, or maybe at least a pretty similar power level there. Yeah, this this became a pretty long video at the end here, but whatever. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. I'm terribly sorry for all the mumbles, the pauses, the awkward silences, the stumbles on words, and etc, etc. I'm just a little bit tired, and I'm also obviously speaking in my second language, and English is apparently pretty difficult, guys. I didn't know, so yeah. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye bye. Huh? Oh, you're still here. Well, I'm sorry. I think you should probably go and check out a video maybe over here or somewhere here. You can even subscribe down here. That would be really, really nice. I would highly appreciate that. I'm gonna go snort some more lines. See ya.